Educational assessment is an important aspect of the process of education. This is because assessment is one of the factors that help us in establishing the success or failure of education in terms of achieving its ends or goals. So in the current presentation, we will have an overview of the educational assessment processes in Pakistan in general. First, let us have some background, a brief background or history of the educational assessment in Pakistan. Generally, the traditional focus or historical focus of educational assessment in Pakistan is on theoretical or establishing the theoretical knowledge or rote memorization of students. From the beginning, the inception of the country to the 1970s, the focus basically of exams was on traditional exams that focused on measuring the theoretical knowledge of the candidates through essay type questions. There was generally limited focus on practical and conceptual learning. In the 1980s and 90s, there was some shift in terms of the focus of exams, and so there was the introduction of more multiple choice questions or objective questions. You can say there was shift to objectivity, to standardizations in exams, but the counter of it was that although it brought some objectivity in terms of the evaluation processes, the counter was that there was limited scope for creativity in such type of exams that were predominantly based on MCQs or objective type items. In the 2000 onwards and currently, because of international influences such as the influences coming from the UNESCO and the World Bank frameworks, there is an introduction of the National Educational Assessment System in Pakistan since 2003, and as a result there is some shift towards outcome-based evaluation. In other words, evaluation that is aimed at evaluating or measuring more concrete knowledge, skills, and outcomes on the part of students rather than their theoretical knowledge. And so this seems a kind of more effective structure these days, but in terms of implementation, there is some inconsistency. And so we will now discuss what are the challenges that the current educational assessment in general faces in Pakistan. So the first one is that there is generally overemphasis on memory testing or rote memorization of the theoretical understanding or maybe the knowledge that students have in terms of information. So, for example, assessments are primarily based on testing the memory of students rather than their problem solving or creativity or critical thinking skills. Secondly, the current assessment systems are rigid in terms of the philosophy that one size fits all. That actually means that all students, without looking for their multiple intelligences, without considering the various ways in which their potential could be measured, there is one size fit all, one type of question papers, one type of tests, and so every student across the board is actually expected to perform well on those tests. So there is this kind of rigidity, lack of flexibility. Then the other challenge is that in many cases teachers who have the primary task of preparing the assessments, they are under-trained in terms of designing and implementing formative assessments and even summative assessments, the assessments that are based on measuring the authentic learning of students and measuring their competencies. So instead, rote memorization and in some cases their abilities to cheat during exams is actually tested. Then the other important challenge that we have in assessments is malpractices, or you can say the use of unfair means. So in many cases, cheating or use of unfair means is rampant in exams, and so that actually that undermines the credibility of exams, especially of high stakes exams that happen at crucial stages of the educational processes, such as the secondary school exams, the higher secondary school exams, and so on. Then lack of authenticity in terms of the outcomes of exam. So the aims generally are not clear, they're not very authentic, like why particular exams are held in particular ways and have particular structures. Similarly, the structures of exams lack authenticity in terms of basically measuring the real knowledge and skills of students. The content that we have in exams, in exam papers, sometimes does not reflect the aims and objectives of the educational process. Sometimes they do not actually comprehensively reflect the content of particular courses. Then the lack of authenticity is also reflective in the process of the conduct of exams. So in many cases, exam conduct do not follow the procedures, and so there are compromises on those, and so overall the process of exam in many cases lack authenticity, and as a result this becomes a big challenge in terms of the authenticity of the process and outcomes of exam itself. Then lack of professionalism. In many cases, professional understanding, professional knowledge of those who prepare and plan exams, those who conduct exams and assessments, and those who evaluate students, for example, students' papers or tests. So lack of professional knowledge, skills, and aptitude on the part of these important stakeholders can lead to a compromise on the authenticity of the assessment, overall the assessment structure and system. Now, what can be done in order to improve educational assessment in Pakistan in general? So first of all, there is need for a paradigm shift, or a shift in the philosophy of assessment. And so generally the high stake exams that are once a live phenomena and that happens at the end of a particular educational program or a particular stage should generally be replaced by more formative assessments. And so formative assessments are assessments that are continuous assessments. And generally, teachers and educational institutions are more involved in the formative assessments. And because of the continuity of this assessment, this brings in more authenticity to the process of assessment. This could happen in the form of students developing portfolios or courses, or a course in the different courses or years of study. Then classroom observations could also be a part of assessment. Assessment could also be conducted in the form of projects and peer reviews, and so on. So more formative assessments instead of one summative assessment at the end of a program is something that can play a positive role in improving the authenticity of the assessment process. Secondly, professional conduct is very important. So there is need for those who are involved in the process of assessment to be trained on a more professional level. So for example, mostly teachers or evaluators, paper setters, paper checkers, they need to be trained in order to be able to design and implement modern student-centered and authentic assessment processes. Then there is also need for more flexibility in terms of the exam structures and patterns. So varied assessment strategies should be used rather than one. For example, instead of just basing the whole assessment process on a written test, there should be more strategies in play. For example, what I just mentioned above, such as observations, projects, peer reviews, portfolios, and so on. And then standardization and localization balance. So exams need to be standard, especially high-stake exams, but also there should be some flexibility in terms of looking at the particular needs of particular areas, particular students, so that the concept of inclusive education and inclusive assessment are incorporated into the process of assessment. And lastly, there should be mechanisms, there should be tactical strategies and mechanisms and strategic in order to counterbalance malpractices, or you can say the use of unfair means in exams. So on a tactical level, exam should be conducted where malpractices are actually countered in a practical way during the conduct of the exam or assessment. While on a strategic level, why the phenomena of malpractices, or you can say unfair means, happen during exam, this question should be responded on a strategic level, and so the very reasons should be countered that actually lead to the use of malpractices or unfair means in exam. So both short-term, practical, and long-term, and more theoretical type of steps need to be taken in order to make the process of exam or assessment more authentic.